Okay, apologies if you didn't hear me before. I was talking off mic, and I've been quite rightly told off for that because people are watching via streaming. I was just saying it's so important to have a integrated rail network system. I think that is the answer for all of us, particularly in land countries with big land areas to cross. So I'm all for that. Right. I think today has been really, really interesting. I don't know if you were here this morning, any of you, but the sessions have been right on the button. I mean, talking about communication when it comes to travel, talking about with Duncan, talking about the way that we approach the whole notion of travel, and again, trying to communicate the positive aspect of how it can actually be beneficial for the environment. That's the way to look at it, not to be, I guess, apologetic all the time for what travel can also do, but that's what this very conference is about. Let's go to another very pressing topic, and that is protection of the environment and how we deal with that. I have somebody here who's going to chair this panel, Daniel Turner, who's the director of Animondial. Is it French, Daniel? It sounds French. Animondial, I think you used to work for Born Free? Yeah, which is a very good, again, protection charity. But we're going to talk now about, again, how tourism and animal protection, or conservation generally, can work together. So Daniel, can you come up and introduce the panel, please? Daniel Turner, everybody.
Thanks so much for coming, and apologies, but I'm going to be speaking in English, and hats off to all the French speakers for persevering in English. It's really embarrassing for me. This session is focused on tourism's impact on nature conservation, and it is a new topic for travel and tourism, but it's certainly not a new topic for the world. And before I introduce the speakers and ask them to come up and sit down, I just wanted to give you a kind of an overview as to where we are at, because
Daniel, there's technical hitch with this side, so you're going to...
I'll persevere. So I just want to give you a kind of a snapshot as to where we are, because we are at a crisis point. And I know that the conference has been very much talking about climate crisis, but I would tend to challenge the fact that perhaps the biodiversity loss crisis is more profound and more urgent. So nature is the very fabric on which all life is based on Earth. It's essential to human existence. It provides countless ecosystem services on which we all rely. And it ensures our means for achieving net zero. Nature includes all non-living materials, such as soil, water, air, and all living things, from bacteria to blue whales, referred to as biodiversity. Travel and tourism is intrinsically linked to nature. Over 80% of travel and tourism goods and services are directly or indirectly rely on nature's resources and functioning ecosystems. The popularity of nature-based tourism grows year on year, currently representing 50% of travel and tourism's market share. It generates annual revenues of upwards of $600 billion a year, supports millions of jobs, provides opportunities for countries to grow and diversify their economies while protecting their biodiversity and natural heritage. Across the world, travel and tourism not only funds protected areas and conservation action, but it also helps local economies restructure a way that benefits both people and planet. From gorilla trekking to wildlife safaris to whale watching, travel and tourism has shown its potential to create win-win scenarios that access multiple targets, both in the 2020 biodiversity framework, which we will talk about in this session, and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Yet, if poorly managed, by not considering potential impact on the natural world, travel and tourism can contribute to all 5 drivers of biodiversity loss. Those are the degradation of wild spaces when you convert them to usable spaces, the unsustainable sourcing of wildlife, climate change that disrupts and destroys ecosystems, pollution from single-use plastics to pesticides, and the introduction of invasive species. And so tourism contributes to all 5, or can contribute to all 5. Globally, current demands on the natural world are equivalent to the output of 1.6 Earths, imposing an ever-growing strain on the biosphere and causing unprecedented global declines in biodiversity. We learned earlier this month from the Living Planet report that since 1970, the abundance of wildlife has declined by almost 70%, and 1 in 4 species is facing extinction. Allowing this downward path to continue will not only mean we lose the solution to lessen climate change and prevent pandemics, it will also mean a demise in travel and tourism, a demise in the health and well-being of ourselves, and literally an end of life as we know it. The good news, and we are coming to the speakers, the good news is that the sector is fighting back. Animondial is working with the World Travel and Tourism Council. We have published a report called Nature Positive Travel and Tourism, which provides our sector with all it needs to minimize our dependency and impacts on nature, and to contribute to the biodiversity protection and recovery. Today, I'm joined by experts in global and regional tourism, as well as carbon and consumer intelligence, to explore tourism's impact on nature, the challenges and the solutions. If I could ask Michel, Denis, Christelle, and Kit to come onto the stage, please. Thank you. Right, so I know it was a fairly long introduction, but I felt that it was important because when we, for that report that I mentioned, we consulted over 200 businesses, travel businesses, and we found that actually the majority of people really didn't know what nature was, what biodiversity was, and the current situation that we're in and what that could mean to travel and tourism. So hence that introduction. So we learned that travel and tourism is both a friend and a foe of nature, driving and supporting nature conservation, but also contributing to the 5 drivers of biodiversity loss. Michel, in your role, I hope one of those work down there, in your role as special advisor on tourism to both the French government and UNWTO, recognizing that we have multiple crises, climate crisis, biodiversity crisis, potential next pandemic around the corner, which crises are most important?
This is much more than an introduction. It's a lobbying introduction because you give the answer at the same time you give the question. But clearly, we know that we have a crisis. We know that the situation is complicated in terms of climate. We all recognize that. But I really think that we have to learn and to observe the reality with the real figures of the impact of tourism. And we have to learn and observe again what the customer are waiting for, because we have what we hope. And after we have the reality of the business and the reality of the sector of tourism. This is the first point, because I really think that when you say a huge impact on the biodiversity, this is your first introduction. I will say that we have to measure better the impact on the biodiversity. If you allow me, I'm going to give the example of Canada and in Quebec, the CEPAC, with the organization of the national parks in Quebec. They decided 15 years ago to organize the parks for tourism. And at that moment, they had an objective to multiply by 6 the number of tourism, from 1 million to 6 million. They decide to organize the accommodation of tourists. They decide to put a maximum of tourists at the same time in the park, but they organize all the services. They put accommodation with Huttopia. I'm CEO of Huttopia International, and at this moment they buy 750 tents, Canadian tents, manufactured by French guys. And at the end, now, they receive more than 6 million tourists. But what they did is to invest all the revenue on conservation and protection and to measure the impact on biodiversity. What is very good, and it's an incredible result, the biodiversity had increased. So, we have a real example of when you manage tourism, and I'm not speaking when you stop tourism. When you manage tourism, you are able to protect, to conserve, and to measure the biodiversity and the environment.
Thank you, thank you. Yes, I mean, I think there's lots of examples, and certainly the gorilla trekking in Uganda, Rwanda, has demonstrated how tourism can really bring back a species that was on the brink of extinction. So there's definitely some good examples, and personally a great advocate of travel and tourism continuing, but in a responsible way. And we all believe in that, right?
And this is what UNWTO is working on, is how to do a cleaner tourism, cleaner transportation, cleaner accommodation. Is clearly to be able to organize it and to have the sector thinking of what we have to do in the next future.
Exactly. I want to just go back to the fact that, I mean, yesterday we heard a lot of people talking about climate change, and I was sitting on the front row of all of those presentations, kind of listening for the N word, nature, and it really didn't show up in the conversation. So I just want to explore that with Kit. Trust Carbon provides an intelligence platform for businesses that seek effective decarbonisation. We know that climate change is a driver of biodiversity loss, but we also know that biodiversity loss is vital to climate change mitigation and adaptation. Are they two crises or one?
They are two crises, but they need to be thought of as one. The biggest threat in the sustainability industry right now is that we solve climate change and we don't solve the biodiversity issue. Because, you know, if we get to 2050 and we all turn around and say, wow, okay, we managed to get rid of all the carbon and cool the earth, great. But then, you know, fish stocks in the ocean are still down 90% on 100 years ago, which is just an insane statistic. Insect biomass is down, I don't know what the percentage is, you probably do. But again, just every time you see a statistic related to biodiversity loss, it's terrifying. A quarter of animals are at threat of extinction, you mentioned at the start. Just, so we could solve the climate crisis and still have a whole equally life-threatening or species extinction level threatening crisis for the human race. So we have to think of them as the same thing because the fight is on for both of these at once. The clock is ticking and we can't solve one and then move on to the other one. There is not time for that. Sadly, we're at risk of losing both battles, so we have to go all in on them. And then the best solutions to climate change are ones that solve climate change and solve biodiversity loss. You know, there's a lot of quite rightly sometimes criticism around offsets that are nature-based, partly due to measurement problems and verification problems. But if they are done properly, then we can sequester carbon or protect forests, and in doing so, protect ecosystems and protect biodiversity as well. And the same for blue carbon as well, protecting oceans, creating new mangroves, whatever that looks like. And it's just such a great way of increasing biodiversity. So the best solutions are ones that can combine both and look at both together.
Yes, and actually the most biodiverse locations absorb the most carbon. So that is an indication that work should be done to improve or boost biodiversity, restore nature, and you are ultimately going to be absorbing more carbon, and it's free, which is, you know, business case, right? So do you feel, just by what you just said, do you feel that biodiversity is often left out of the conversation? Is that your, I mean, that's my opinion, but do you think that?
Yeah, there's no question. And it's funny because on one hand, the externality of carbon is greater than biodiversity loss, right? So if you took a flight here, as you know, guilty as well, if you took a flight here, then you have emitted carbon, and that's going to do its little bit to warm up the atmosphere, right? You're never going to notice what that warming effect is, right? But until 50 years time, and it's the concentration of all the warming effects of every person on Earth. Whereas biodiversity, you can see it, right? You can see when a forest gets chopped down. You can see when something unsustainable happens. If you've been following what's happening in the Alaskan crabbing industry at the moment, you're not going to be able to get Alaskan crab for the next couple of years, right? So you will see those effects much quicker and much more obviously. And so it is funny that the conversation is so much about carbon, rightly so, but that we're not lifting up biodiversity to the same point. So I don't think we should bring the carbon conversation down, but I think the biodiversity conversation needs to be brought up to the same level as well.
And I think you made a great point there that we don't need data, which is often seen as the issue with biodiversity. We don't need data to appreciate nature. And that's why I want to come on to Christelle, Deputy Managing Director of Savoie and Mont Blanc. I would say it's fair to say that nature is probably your greatest asset. Do you consider nature in the context of your decarbonisation mandate, or do you see it as a lesser or greater value?
Our territory, Savoie Mont Blanc, is famous for ski resorts. You'd think skiing and sports is the main thing coming to our territory, but actually it's nature that's number one trigger and the number one thing that people want going to the mountains. So nature is our asset. It's actually our playground. We're the first destination for outdoor activities as well. So it's about reconnecting to nature. It's about breathing fresh air and pure air. It's about contemplating nice vistas in the first place, and then it's about playing sports. So we actually see that there's a shift in population as well. So you have the ski fans like I am, and then you have also the nature fans that are coming to our mountains, especially after COVID. We've seen a lot of new hordes of tourists coming to the mountains that may not have the codes or the culture of how to behave in the mountains. And that's where national parks and natural parks, for instance, come into play, where they are there to preserve nature, biodiversity. Actually, we have a national park that's been created 60 years ago, like in Quebec, Parc de la Vanoise, created to protect the ibex in the first place, the big white goat with the big horns. And these people actually are there to tell you not to camp anywhere, not to pick up the flowers, not to pet the dogs that are actually shepherds for the cattle in the Alps. So it's about explaining all of that in a positive way to tourists. And I think it's our duty as an industry to carry these messages as well as all the fun you can have skiing. And we talk about that in the summer in the parks, but also during the winter. For instance, Les Arcs, which you might know, which is one of the top 10 ski resorts in the world, is in Savoie Mont Blanc, and they are in the Vanoise Park actually, and they've created like a protection zone for the black grouse, a bird. They've actually planted 1,000 trees by the slopes so that they protect the skiers from going into the nesting area. And until the trees have grown, there's panels explaining to the skiers that they shouldn't ski in the puff over there and actually stay on the slopes.
And how is that generally received by the public? I mean, obviously you're providing interpretation, you're providing opportunity, you're providing communication. Do they take that on board in a positive way, or do they sort of question and try and get around the barriers?
You always have rebels anyway. But no, I think it's about being positive. And if you do it in a fun and light way and not in a very dark and forceful way, it should work. Well, I think that's what we're going to try.
And that's what I want to ask Denny about. Your company, G2A, provides data on ski and beach destinations in France, Italy, Switzerland, and Austria. An insight of 120 million tourist nights per year. Amazing. What are people talking about? Do tourists appreciate nature?
In introduction, I'm so sorry, I'm not confident in my English, that's why I have my phone, but I have good news for French people here. I speak with a terrible French accent. It will be easier for you to, to understand what I mean, what I say. Yes, in line with the first intervention, the first very striking element in the evolution of the number of people integrating environmental awareness in their choice of holidays is very important. We have the habit to interview 70,000 people for the 4 main European markets each year. And in 62 of respondents were integrating environmental awareness in their choice. There was 83% in 22, 62, 83. And, but already 89% among for 18 to 25 years old people. But be careful, intentions do not mean action. That's one of the reasons why we are co-constructing a new observatory of desirable features in tourism in few months, I hope with you. For example, this observatory should make it possible to measure the gap between the intentions and personal or collective action of tourists themselves and of the territories. The reason for the choice of destination in summer and in winter are not exactly the same. It would be a good thing for Savoie Mont Blanc. The three main ones in winter are for 46% of people, landscape and environment, and fresh air. Then a third to disconnect and recharge themselves, and the unspoiled nature influences the choice of only 18% of people. The main ones in summer are landscape, environment for 56% of respondents, then silence, and finally fresh air. For summer, their choice takes account to the unspoiled nature for a third of people, almost twice as much as in winter. And I don't speak not only about mountain, but all the area.
So just back to Christelle, we are getting a sense that people do care. I suppose the question is, do they take that information and then apply it? It's just interesting. There's lots of data around. We've got the Economist information unit. They polled people in 54 countries. This is in 2021, covering 80% of the world's population, and they found that people very much care about nature and what businesses in particular and governments are doing to take action. So could you give us an insight as to what you're doing you've talked about some of the things, but as far as allowing people to make informed choices?
One thing about nature is probably talking about it a bit more, and on our social networks, we're actually the first mountain destination kind of ecosystem in a digital world. We've got 4 million people that we animate each month, for instance. It's talking to them about the nice pictures and the groundhog, and they love that, and the algorithm in Facebook loves that. But then it's also telling them about the different national parks and the different, educating them about nature, that kind of thing. So we have to bring that into our editorial line on the network, so we kind of make them aware of the topics. And then on a practical level, so it's not nature, but it's carbon footprint, so I'm allowed to talk about it. We've identified that 70% of our carbon footprint is actually transportation coming to our resorts. And so we've just launched, so we don't have a magical stick, but we've launched a platform that's called Go Savoie Mont Blanc with Antidotes, which is a Savoyard startup from Savoie. It's about making an informed choice on the transportation. So you enter point A, you're leaving from Brighton, for instance, you're going to Val d'Isère, or any of our resorts. It tells you which combination of transport you can take, and it brings up first the least carbonated option. So you see it first. You can see the cheapest and the quickest, but you also see the greenest. And that's what we put forward first. So we kind of educate people, and we nudge them to take the right decision. We hope they will take the right decision. And then we will monitor, how many people book through that, and then we can push them activities when they're on site, etc. So we hope that that's going to be a success, and that all of the territories and the resorts actually use that tool as well themselves. And 1 + 1 + 112 might make a difference on our carbon footprint.
So I suppose the question now is it right for members of the public to kind of lead everything? The sort of onus is on the public to do the right thing, make the right choices, not to have that impact. And I was just this morning in the Novotel over the road. This was hanging on the door, and there's no information about what the hotel's doing on nature and planet's resources. And it says you can help the planet's protect the planet's resources we will follow your lead. And it's obviously talking about how, what to do with your towels and all this sort of thing. I suppose the question is, shouldn't businesses and governments be leading and advising the consumer what to do and what not to do? Michel, that one's for you.
Yes, of course. This is the answer. What is very important, I think so, and I think that the governments and territories have to work on it. We are speaking about conservation and sustainable tourism. And I really think that conservation is a natural, cultural conservation of our heritage. And we speak from the beginning on the carbon impact and the environmental, but governments and territories, they have to find a new model of tourism with an economical part and at the same time a social part. Because clearly what we are doing, and it's a need, and we have to push on that, on the environmental part, is going to be more expensive. It's going to be more difficult to come and to arrive on tourism destinations. We saw it clearly right now. And I always remember that more than 35% of French people are not going on holiday. So we do not have to forget that people want to go on holiday. The increase of people traveling in the world is going to increase. So we are not able to stop that because this is the humanity who wants to move all the time. So we have to manage that. And this is why it's important for government and destination to think about it. When you are speaking about that, in Huttopia, we are working on where we can develop an economical, a sustainable tourism and destination, trying to train people in the area, trying to work with the people in the area, being reversible, being light. We have everything on that. We are educating our customers. All the activities inside our sites are based on educate people on the nature environment. And after, we push people to go and to visit the village. We want them to consume in the outside of our sites. But after, are we really able to do that? Well, you have to look the regulation in France and in other countries. You have to look if what we are saying is really what we are doing. And there is a huge difference. I gave last week this example, but I'm going to say it again. In France, if you want to do a natural camping in the nature, it's impossible. The regulation forbids to create a new camping if you do not have a continuity with urbanism. So you have to do it in the village or in the city if you want to create a natural village. So today we can say all the morning we have to create a natural environment, accommodation, products, and so on. And after, the regulation do not allow you to do it. So governments and destination have to work. Yes, of course. But after, we have to think how they can do. And this is what is important in UNWTO, is to have those discussions at global level with all the countries, because you will not have the solution in only one country. So France can lead this movement, but we have to think that people are coming from all over the world, and they will travel more, and you have area like Asia or Africa, they will more than double in the next 10 years. So if we want to solve that, we have to speak about real figures and real situations.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, that leads on rather nicely to the fact, just for everyone to be aware of if you have a business, is there's this Convention of Biological Diversity. They have their 15th conference of the parties in December in Montreal. It's been postponed twice because of the COVID pandemic. And this will bring together 196 countries. They will be discussing the global biodiversity targets for the next 10 years. And business is very much in those targets. There's 2 targets of 22 that are focused on business. And the key one, which I think is going to be, well, I mean, they're both fairly challenging, I think. One of them is mainstreaming biodiversity safeguards in your day-to-day operations and decision-making. This is something that has actually come out of a declaration focused on tourism that came about in 2016. It was recognizing the importance of tourism and how nature is integral to its goods and services. And so it was felt by the delegation there to mainstream biodiversity. The second point is about measuring impact and dependency on nature, and then demonstrating over time how you are minimizing that impact that you have identified. So just thinking about that, if I could ask first Michel and then Christelle, from a business perspective, on hearing that, I mean, obviously you've got to wait for it to get into domestic legislation and, you know, be enforced and so on, but hearing that a business, your business, will have to measure its dependency and impact on nature, what do you feel about that?
Clearly, we measure our impact. First, if you are looking at Huttopia, we are manufacturing our own accommodation, cabins and tents. So we have the capacity to measure and to transform what we manufacture. So this is the first point. But clearly, the evolution of the economic model, we have first, if we want to do it, and this is the main point, for the time being, people are asking the same product than in the past. They are consuming the same product. We want to transform it. They want us to transform our product. But they do not want really to pay more. They do not want really to change their destination. So you see, when you put an airline, well, the flight is full currently. And the prices have increased 50%, 60%, and double. So clearly, we have to find a solution, because why the sector is going to invest to change the product if the customers are consuming the product they have? So we have to find a way in between governments and the sector to see how we can invest to change this model and to push people to consume the right product. But I really think that we have to observe the demand, and the change will come because we are going to change the offer. Because if you look, people are going back to the cruises, they are going back to the Spanish hotels. Do remember that Spain has 36% more hotels than France. And the first accommodation in France is camping. So we have to think about that, because I do not think that the sector will really finance alone this transformation, because instead of that, there is no economic model if there is not a part paid by the humanity. We have to find the solution, and we have to push this transformation, and we have to do it quickly, because it's going to be mandatory for the climate.
Thank you. And Christelle, you could give an insight from a destination perspective.
Actually, I can bounce back on what you said. It's actually, I think our job as a tourism board is to make the actors and the players, the stakeholders, conscious of the change. Some are more aware of it than others. Some have a business model that works brilliantly in the winter. So why would they challenge that? So, but we know that things are changing. We know that below 1,500 meters, it might be tricky in the future to have snow. So we are going to help the professionals in our sector to anticipate those changes, to have the common tools to measure change as well, and also carry out the surveys about the customers and how trends maybe we need to evolve in our offer as well. We need to tackle the summer, we need to tackle also the springtime and the autumn, and see what offer as an industry we can come up with to make things change, and then also prove that the economic impact can be positive for the stakeholders as well. So it's kind of a virtuous circle we should get in of understanding the consumer, evolving with the offer, proving that it works, and then hopefully that green and not vicious but virtuous circle will work. So I think it's our role as a kind of a B2B kind of toolkit agency to help our destination and our territories to take that on board.
Thank you.
I'm going to add something. You know that I have a position in Nouvelle-Aquitaine as responsible of tourism. And as we know that we have to help companies to be able to finance, this transformation, we have created a fund, Nouvelle-Aquitaine Croissance Tourisme, to be able to enter in the capital of the companies, to leverage debts, to be able to pay and to make this investment, to help the transformation and structure the territory. And this is what we need, clearly, is to create the mechanism to finance this transformation.
Absolutely. Just very quickly, Kit, any thoughts on that whole measurement bit? Because obviously we're not talking about carbon here, we're talking about something very different. Any thoughts on that, just very quickly, because with minutes left.
So carbon has a huge advantage, right, which is there's one number that we're all focused on, and when we communicate about climate change, we can just talk about that number. And when businesses are approaching the climate issue, they can focus on that number and they can say, okay, well, we know we emitted this much, we know we can take these actions to reduce, offset, capture that carbon. It's nice and simple. I think the issue of biodiversity is the macro numbers are known. We talked about them earlier, biodiversity loss on a large scale. Where that isn't turned into is on a kind of micro, personal level, right? It's not possible at the moment, really, to say, as a business, your 30,000 trips that your employees take every year has this effect on biodiversity, whether that's good or bad. And likewise, it comes through to point of sale then. You, as someone booking travel, have no idea which is the best option when it comes to biodiversity. And I think that's a challenge, because I'm an optimist, and I think most people do want to do good. And I think a lot of businesses, whether it's altruistic or whether it's just selfish for marketing purposes, I think they also want to be able to say, yeah, we're doing a good thing, just like they do when it comes to carbon, or starting to do more when it comes to carbon. And so I think if we can solve this problem, then there'll be a lot more investment, either at point of sale or from businesses, on more sustainable options for biodiversity.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think, summing up, we need transformational change. I mean, society needs transformational change. So tourism has to follow that too. And a key point to make is that this report that we did with World Travel and Tourism Council provides you with all that you need to know about nature-positive tourism, which is the term that we've called it. It provides a roadmap of 4 phases on how to assess and define your measurements and build your sustainability, your nature-positive strategy, how to reduce where you can avoid, and how to restore nature And then the last two phases about monitoring and reporting and collaboration and communication. We didn't really get to talk about collaboration. We could actually have a day's discussion on this topic, but obviously 45 minutes. I would advise you, if you haven't seen the report already, to go to the Animondial website, animondial.com, and you can download the report there. It's also on the WTTC website. And last point is that WTTC and Animondial, we will be going to that conference in Montreal, and we will be working on behalf of the travel sector, and this is mainly the membership of WTTC, and putting forward to the conference of parties that because travel and tourism is so integral to this topic, is that there is a potential for the sector to become a guardian of nature. And we would be looking for government subsidy, we would be looking for frameworks, we would be looking for support for the sector to achieve those goals. So fingers crossed. And if you're interested and you want to be involved, come and find me afterwards. Thanks very much for all your time. They've been slaving away with all my emails going backwards and forwards with guidance and so on. So thank you so much. Thank you for persevering with the English language. And thank you all for coming. Thanks so much.